A vast alien empire, spanning thousands of star systems, had encountered countless species in its millennia of conquest. Each new race fell before its technological might, submitting to servitude or annihilation. When humanity was discovered, the empire barely took notice. A minor, primitive species on the fringes of their dominion, armed with outdated weapons and no interstellar presence. The empire sent a single fleet, not as a show of force, but as an afterthought. The fleet arrived in the Sol system, broadcasting their demands. Surrender, or be destroyed. The message was cold, calculated, and absolute. The Empire had done this 1,000 times before, and the results had never changed. Planets that resisted were burned. Populations were crushed. Civilizations disappeared. The aliens believed humanity would be no different. But humanity was different. The first response from Earth was silence. No surrender, no acceptance, no diplomatic plea. The fleet's commanders saw this as expected fear. The weaker species often hesitated before their inevitable submission. They waited, scanning Earth's networks, searching for signs of compliance. What they found instead disturbed them. Humans were preparing for war. They observed a global mobilization, industries shifting overnight to mass-produce weapons, militaries pooling resources at an unprecedented scale. But it was the attitude of the humans that truly baffled them. They did not see fear. They saw anger. Defiance. A species that should have been crushed by terror was instead preparing for a fight they had no chance of winning. The fleet's commander decided to end this quickly. A planetary bombardment would bring humanity to its knees before they could even fire a shot. The fleet aligned over major cities, preparing to unleash the destruction that had subdued countless worlds before. But before they could begin, Earth struck first. A coordinated missile launch from every corner of the planet filled the sky. It was crude, outdated weaponry, nothing compared to the Empire's defenses. The aliens scoffed at the feeble attempt and activated their shields. But something went wrong. Their systems flickered, weapons went offline, and shields collapsed. The missiles hit with devastating force, tearing through the once invincible fleet. In mere minutes, half of their forces were gone. The survivors reeled in shock. No species had ever disabled their technology. No species had ever destroyed a fleet of the Empire so quickly. The commander, furious and desperate, ordered a retreat to regroup and analyze what had happened. As the crippled fleet fled, Earth watched and waited. The aliens studied the battle, trying to understand how a primitive race had overwhelmed them. It wasn't advanced weaponry. It wasn't superior technology. It was human ingenuity. They had anticipated every move. They had hacked the Empire's systems, exploited weaknesses the Empire had ignored, turned their own strengths against them. And they had done it all within days of first contact. The Empire realized humanity was not a species to be conquered. They were a threat. A species that could adapt, that could learn, that could turn an overwhelming force into a disadvantage. A species that had no interest in submission. The Empire sent a distress signal across its territories, calling for reinforcements. Humanity did not wait. They had seen the enemy retreat, and they knew this war was not over. Factories worked non-stop, scientists pushed the boundaries of technology, soldiers trained in methods never before imagined. The aliens believed their empire was invincible. Humanity saw it as an opportunity. As the second wave of invasion forces prepared to launch, they received an unexpected transmission. It was not a message of surrender. It was a declaration of war. Humanity had just begun to fight. The Empire's high command was in chaos. Never before had a fleet been repelled by an inferior species. Never before had an Empire-class warship been downed by planetary defenses. It was unacceptable. Humiliating. A mistake that needed correction. A second fleet was assembled, twice the size of the first, with enhanced countermeasures against electronic warfare. The Empire would not allow a repeat of its failure. This time, they would burn Earth to ash. As the fleet traveled toward Sol, human forces were already in motion. They knew the Empire would return, and they knew conventional warfare alone would not be enough. Every scientist, engineer, and strategist worked around the clock, dissecting the enemy's technology, developing countermeasures, and building weapons Earth had never seen before. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving a point. When the alien fleet emerged from FTL at the edge of the solar system, they found something unexpected. Human ships. Dozens of them. They were crewed by Imperial standards, mere repurposed asteroid miners and hastily constructed battleships. But they were armed. They were waiting. And they struck first. The humans had learned from the first battle. They knew the Empire's reliance on centralized command, on automated coordination. So they disrupted it. The first wave of human missiles was not meant to destroy, it was meant to blind. Electromagnetic pulses scrambled sensors, hacked systems, and spread misinformation across the enemy's network. The Empire's warships, built for overwhelming force, suddenly found themselves fighting in the dark. Then came the second wave. Kinetic railguns, missile swarms, and high-speed attack craft swarmed the disoriented fleet. Human ships moved unpredictably, using outdated but effective guerrilla tactics. They struck weak points, overloaded shield generators, and forced the Empire's commanders into a battle they weren't prepared for. The aliens had superior firepower, but they were fighting an enemy that didn't play by their rules. The fleet's admiral, a veteran of countless conquests, realized this was no ordinary resistance. Humanity fought not with desperation, but with cold precision. Every move was calculated. Every strike had a purpose. The humans weren't just defending, they were dismantling the Empire's war machine piece by piece. And then the trap was sprung. Out of nowhere, hidden orbital platforms and disguised asteroid bases activated, launching a barrage of nuclear-tipped missiles. The Empire's ships, still reeling from the chaotic battle, had no time to react. Explosions ripped through the fleet. In a matter of minutes, what was supposed to be an overwhelming invasion force had been turned into wreckage drifting in the void. A handful of Imperial ships managed to flee, limping back to their territory with one horrifying realization. The Empire had underestimated humanity again. The shattered remnants of the Empire's Second Fleet limped back to Imperial space, carrying a message that sent shockwaves through the highest levels of command. Humanity had not only resisted but had systematically annihilated an armada that should have crushed them. This was not a minor setback. This was the beginning of something far worse. Panic spread through the Empire's ruling council. For the first time in thousands of years, they faced an enemy that refused to submit. An enemy that adapted faster than any species they had ever encountered. The Empire had spent centuries perfecting the art of conquest, but now they faced something beyond their calculations. A species that was learning at an exponential rate. Desperate to regain control, the Empire declared total war. A full-scale mobilization across every system, conscripting entire planets, constructing warships at an unprecedented rate. The Empire had never needed to fight a prolonged war. It had always won before the enemy could resist. But now, it prepared for the unthinkable. What they failed to realize was that humanity had already moved beyond mere resistance. Even as the Empire assembled its armadas, humanity struck first. They were no longer just defending Earth. They were taking the fight to the enemy. Deep space reconnaissance fleets slipped past Imperial borders, striking at supply lines, disrupting logistics, sowing chaos in the outer colonies. The Empire had grown complacent, relying on the assumption that no force could ever challenge their rule. They had never designed their defenses to repel a threat from within. Humanity exploited every weakness, infiltrating networks, hijacking communications, and turning the Empire's own infrastructure against itself. The first sign of true disaster came when one of the Empire's core manufacturing worlds suddenly went silent. At first, command assumed a simple system failure. Then came the reports. Explosions across planetary shipyards. Reactor meltdowns in orbital foundries. A complete collapse of production. The cause? A single human strike team, undetected, using stolen Imperial technology to slip through security. The Empire tried to adjust, tightening security, increasing patrols, deploying countermeasures. It didn't matter. Humanity was already 10 steps ahead. Each countermeasure was anticipated. Each defense was subverted. What was supposed to be a swift and overwhelming retaliation had turned into something the Empire had never experienced before. A war of attrition. For the first time in its existence, the Empire was bleeding. And humanity was just getting started. The Empire's core systems were in turmoil. Supply chains disrupted, colonies rebelling, military campaigns collapsing before they could begin. What was supposed to be a swift and brutal war had become a nightmare. The enemy was everywhere and nowhere, striking with precision, vanishing before retaliation could land. This was not how wars were fought. This was something entirely different. This was annihilation by 1,000 cuts. The ruling council demanded an immediate shift in strategy. No more underestimating the humans. No more assuming technological superiority would win the war. The Empire needed to adapt, and fast. But that was the problem. Adaptation had never been their strength. Their civilization thrived on dominance, on the assumption that they were untouchable. Now they faced a species that had built itself on struggle, on relentless innovation, on the simple refusal to accept defeat. Desperation led the Empire to a new decision: total planetary eradication. If humanity could not be conquered, they would be exterminated. The Empire began assembling the largest fleet in its history. Tens of thousands of warships, weapons capable of cracking planets in a single barrage. The final strike against Earth would be so overwhelming no resistance would remain. Humanity knew it was coming. They had intercepted the Empire's encrypted transmissions, deciphered their battle plans before the enemy even finished drafting them. Earth had no illusions about the power of the Imperial fleet. If they fought conventionally, they would lose. But humanity no longer fought conventional wars. Before the Empire could launch its final assault, something unthinkable happened. The heart of the Empire itself came under attack. Not by warships, not by armies, but by information. The AI systems governing their logistics networks crashed, planetary defense grids went offline, factories shut down as critical software turned against its owners. The Empire had never known cyber warfare at this scale. They had never faced an enemy that could rewrite the rules of engagement mid-war. By the time they realized what was happening, it was already too late. Then the strikes began. Not against their front lines, but deep within their most secure territories. Key worlds went dark, orbital stations exploded with no warning, entire sectors fell into chaos. It wasn't just an invasion, it was a dissection. The Empire had spent thousands of years breaking civilizations, stripping them of their identity, absorbing them into its machine. But now, for the first time, it was experiencing what it had inflicted on others. Its fleets were turning against each other as misinformation spread. Its leadership was fracturing under the weight of constant losses. The invincible Empire was beginning to collapse under its own weight. And humanity was still pushing forward. The Empire was crumbling. What had once been an unstoppable force spanning thousands of star systems was now a fractured, panicked shadow of its former self. Entire fleets were lost to misinformation and sabotage. Core systems fell into disarray as humanity exploited every weakness, turning the Empire's own infrastructure against itself. What should have been an easy conquest had turned into a nightmare. The ruling council had no choice but to acknowledge the impossible. Humanity had done what no other species had ever achieved. They had not only resisted, they had put the Empire on the defensive. Entire sectors were lost, colonies revolted, supply lines were cut. But worst of all, humanity had made them afraid. The Empire had never known fear. It had never needed to. But now every high-ranking official, every admiral, every soldier knew the terrifying truth. They were losing. The desperation led to a final reckless plan. If Earth could not be conquered, if the humans could not be crushed in battle, then they would simply be erased. The last remnants of the Empire's greatest fleets were recalled, every available warship was gathered, every last resource was thrown into a single goal: complete planetary extermination. Humanity was prepared. As the largest invasion fleet in history emerged from FTL at the edge of the Sol system, they found something unexpected. No resistance. No fleets. No planetary defenses engaging them. Just silence. The Empire advanced cautiously, scanning for hidden threats for the tricks humanity had used so effectively before. But there was nothing. Earth itself was quiet. Cities still stood, infrastructure remained intact, but the planet was eerily still. The Empire's commanders were confused. Had humanity finally given up? Did they flee? Was this some kind of deception? Then the answer came in the form of a single transmission broadcast across every Imperial frequency. You took too long. At first the Empire's forces didn't understand. Then reports started flooding in from across the Empire. World after world was going dark. Fleets vanishing without a trace. Command centers left abandoned. Entire colonies reduced to silence. Humanity hadn't been waiting to defend Earth. They had been executing the final phase of their war. While the Empire gathered its forces for one last desperate attack, humanity had already struck the killing blow. Sleeper agents embedded deep within the Empire had activated their final directives. Automated virus payloads that had been spreading for months all triggered simultaneously. Weapons systems shut down, planetary defenses deactivated, life support failed across entire stations. The Empire had gathered its fleets for a final battle, but there was nothing left to fight for. Their worlds were already dead. Panic set in. The invasion fleet lost cohesion. Some commanders tried to retreat, others demanded immediate bombardment of Earth in a last act of defiance. But before they could act, a new signal appeared on their sensors. Dozens, hundreds, then thousands of ships emerging from the void. Humanity's true fleet. The Empire had walked into a trap. The Empire's final fleet hung in orbit over Earth, paralyzed by the realization that they had been outmaneuvered once again. The planet below was untouched, but their empire was in ruins. Every warship in their invasion force had just received the same reports: worlds lost, command centers abandoned, entire sectors rendered defenseless. And now, humanity's fleet had arrived. They weren't the crude, repurposed ships the Empire had encountered before. These vessels were something new. Sleek, deadly, built from stolen Imperial technology and enhanced beyond anything the Empire had ever faced. Ships that moved in ways that defied expectation, piloted by a species that had spent the entire war proving one undeniable fact. They learned faster than anyone. The Empire's remaining commanders hesitated. The old arrogance was gone, replaced by something they had never felt before. Uncertainty. Doubt. Fear. They still had more firepower than humanity's fleet, still outnumbered them 2-1. But that didn't matter. Numbers had never mattered in this war. The humans had never fought fair. They had never played by the Empire's rules. And now, with the Empire's own technology turned against them, they realized a terrible truth. This was not a battle. This was an execution. Humanity's fleet moved in perfect coordination, cutting through the Empire's disoriented forces with ruthless precision. Their ships struck hard and fast, targeting propulsion systems, shield generators, command decks. The Empire's warships were turned into floating wrecks before they could even mount a defense. Some of the Empire's commanders tried to fight back, but their own weapons had been compromised. Fire control systems failed, targeting arrays fed them false data. Their most powerful weapons refused to fire. Humanity hadn't just disabled their defenses. They had rewritten the very code of their war machines. One by one, Imperial ships were torn apart. Some tried to flee, only to be intercepted and obliterated. Others, realizing the battle was lost, sent desperate surrender transmissions. But humanity did not respond. Because humanity had already made its decision. For centuries, the Empire had conquered, enslaved, and exterminated entire civilizations without mercy. They had burned worlds to ash, erased entire species from existence, and never once considered the consequences. Now, for the first time, they were on the receiving end of that same cruelty. And humanity had no intention of showing them mercy. Within an hour, the last of the Empire's fleet was gone. Not a single warship remained. The skies above Earth were clear. But this was not the end. It was only the beginning. The Empire no longer existed. Its fleets were gone, its worlds abandoned, its command structure shattered beyond repair. What had once been an unstoppable force that ruled thousands of systems with absolute authority had been reduced to silence. And yet, humanity did not stop. They did not celebrate. They did not claim victory. They simply moved forward, methodically, relentlessly, ensuring that there would be no trace left of their enemy. Surviving imperial officials, those who had once commanded entire sectors with an iron grip, now hid in fear, their own people turning against them. The former ruling council scattered across the galaxy, fleeing to remote worlds, hoping to escape the wrath they had once inflicted on others. But humanity did not forget. One by one, they were found. Not by grand invasion fleets, not by planetary assaults, but by quiet, unstoppable precision. A single infiltrator slipping into a high-security bunker. A lone drone striking at an unmarked escape vessel. A mysterious signal overriding the life support of a hidden refuge. The Empire's leaders had built a civilization on absolute control. Now, they were powerless. Word spread across the remnants of the Imperial population. The war was over, but humanity's campaign was not. They did not conquer. They did not enslave. They erased. Some species that had lived under the Empire's rule celebrated, believing themselves free. But humanity did not answer their calls for alliance or diplomacy. They had no interest in ruling. They had only one purpose now: to ensure that no trace of the Empire remained. World after world was left untouched but empty. Space stations went dark, entire cities abandoned overnight. Humanity moved unseen, a force that did not negotiate, did not accept surrender, did not stop. The last remnants of the Empire tried to gather in one final refuge, a hidden fortress world protected by the most advanced defenses the Empire had ever built. A final stand. A desperate hope that if they could hold out long enough, humanity would relent. But humanity did not relent. The attack came not as an overwhelming fleet, not as a grand battle, but as a quiet inevitability. One by one, the planet's defenses shut down. The Empire's greatest war machines turned against their owners. The final stronghold of what had once been the most powerful force in the galaxy simply ceased to function. When the first human ship finally landed on the surface, there was no one left to resist. No one left to beg for mercy. No one left at all. And then, just as quickly as they had appeared, humanity vanished. They did not claim territory. They did not build an empire of their own. They simply erased the old one and left. The galaxy watched in silence, knowing that somewhere out there, the species that had destroyed the greatest power in history still existed. Waiting. Watching. Humanity had sent a message, one that no species would ever forget. Never again.